Hi, and welcome to this PowerShell for Beginners tutorial series. So this is actually a re-recording of the old PowerShell for Beginners series. In the last series, we took a look at PowerShell 5.1 and really worked with the PowerShell ISE. Since we are re-recording this because the quality was a little bad on the first couple videos, we are actually going to be re-recording this, but this time we're going to be using PowerShell 7.2. The actual version that we're installing today is actually 7.2.6, and we will be using Visual Studio Code the entire time instead of the ISE, since PowerShell 7, actually anything PowerShell 6 and above does not actually have an ISE, so we will actually be using Visual Studio Code as our code editor. So today I'm going to be going over how to set up PowerShell 7.2 and Visual Studio Code on Windows 11. I already have a video on how to do this on Windows 10, but I figured to give the best new experience, we're going to be using Windows 11 this time. So we're going to go through the setup again, and then we're just going to go over some PowerShell fundamentals in this video. So we're not going to be really writing any scripts in this video, but we're going to be going over the basics that I believe is very good to know before starting in PowerShell. So let's actually go ahead and let's get started first by installing PowerShell 7.2. So even on Windows 11, PowerShell only comes in 5.1 by default. So you do have to install 7.2. So the best way to do that is to open up your favorite web browser and your favorite search engine and just search PowerShell 7. And that should give you the first hit should be a Microsoft Docs for installing PowerShell on Windows. You can just go ahead and click on that. And then if you just actually scroll down a little bit here, we will actually see a stable release and long-term support release. So for me, actually both of these are the same on this current day. They are version 7.2.6. Once you get on this GitHub page, you can actually download the MSI right here for 32-bit or for 64-bit. So I've actually already gone ahead and downloaded that. So let's go ahead and let's set up PowerShell 7.2.6. So here we have our downloads folder. We have the PowerShell 7.2.6 and the 64-bit version. Let's just go ahead and let's double click on that here. And this setup is pretty generic. So if you've set up other applications before, this should be pretty straightforward. But we're going to go ahead and click on next here. Now I'm going to leave this as default, but if you do have a specific hard drive that you install all your applications to, make sure to just change it to that. And on this page here, where it is the optional actions, this is where you can set up some additional defaults when you're installing PowerShell 7. I always like to leave the first two checked, and I actually like to just enable PowerShell remoting right off the bat. It just makes my life a little bit easier in the future if I ever want to do PowerShell remoting with this computer. Now, if you are using a work computer, you might want to just check for the policies on PowerShell remoting before you just enable that, or it might also be blocked as well. So let's just go ahead and let's click on next here. These other two options are completely up to you to click on them and to check them. They're mostly just context menus. So when you right click on a file, it'll give you the option to run with PowerShell 7. So let's go ahead and let's click on next here. And here it says this is new for, I believe it is new to PowerShell 7.2 and later. So it will actually automatically update your PowerShell version with Windows updates. So I would recommend to leave this checked. At least it'll keep your PowerShell versions up to date. If you do install PowerShell through the Microsoft Store, it will also automatically update as well. But I always decide to show the MSI version of the install. This way it does not matter if you're installing it on Windows 10, Windows 11, or even if you're installing PowerShell 7 on a server machine, you actually do require to do the install through the MSI installer. So let's click on next here and let's click on install. So here you will need administrative privileges. So if you are installing this on a work computer, you might need to contact your administrator. So we're just going to be installing this. This might take a minute or so. So let me just pause the recording. We'll just come right back once this completes. All right, so the install is actually fully completed here. So we've completed it. It does give us the option to launch PowerShell, but we're actually not going to check this off. We're just going to click on finish here. So now we have PowerShell 7 installed. Now, like I mentioned, we don't actually have the ISE for PowerShell 7, but if we actually go in here and just do the search on Windows 11, and we do a search for PowerShell, so it might just take a few moments here to actually load up what I typed. So here we have it. So here we have our PowerShell 7, and we have our PowerShell 5.1. So if we just click on this one here, we will see, I believe that it is PS version, $PS version. And I think I actually do remember this here. So it is PS version, PS version table dot PS version. So here we have 5.1, and that is because we just launched the regular PowerShell app here. So if we go PowerShell and we launch the PowerShell 7 here, right away we can see the PowerShell 7.2 at the top here, but we can also do a PS version table dot PS version here, and we have 7.2.6. So everything is working here. We could launch PowerShell. Now, one of the other things here is if you do pwsh, that will also just find PowerShell 7. pwsh is the command line command to reference PowerShell 7. So now the last part here to actually replicate an ISE feel with PowerShell 7.2 or anything over PowerShell 6 is to install Visual Studio Code. So we're going to go back here to our favorite browser and our favorite search engine here. And we are just going to search up Visual Studio Code. And once again, you can actually just hit the first link that'll pop up, and you can download for Windows, and that will also download another installer that we've already downloaded here, which is going to be the VSCode user setup. So we're actually just going to go ahead and double click on this install here. And this will launch in just a few moments. So once again, we just get the license and agreement here. So we are going to accept the agreement. Once again, you're going to be asked to pick a location of where to install Visual Studio Code. So once again, if you do have a specific hard drive that you like to install your applications to, this is where you would pick it. And then just going to create a shortcut in the start menu here. We're just going to leave that as the defaults. And then here it's going to ask us to select the additional tasks. So once again, I just register code as an editor for supported file types and add to the path. I really don't select any of the other options. You can definitely create the desktop icon and add the context menu. Again, once you right click on something, you will be given the option to open with code. But I'm actually just going to go ahead and click on next here. And we are going to click on install. So this is again going to install. It might take a few moments. So I'm actually just going to pause the video here, and we are going to come right back once it's done. All right, so it is actually all complete here, and we are given the option to launch Visual Studio Code, and it is checked by default. So we're actually going to go ahead and we are going to launch Visual Studio Code right off the bat here. And here we are given basically our options. So we are given the look that we want. So we're going to stick with the dark theme. I'm not going to sync anything. So basically we can actually just go ahead and close this. Now, the first thing that we are going to actually want to do is install the PowerShell extension for Visual Studio Code, and that will really give it that ISE feel. So to install extensions for Visual Studio Code, on the left-hand side, we are going to click on extensions here. And then in the extensions, we are just going to type in PowerShell, and this will open up. And the first one at the top should appear here. It was developed by Microsoft, so you will see that. So we can actually just go ahead and click on this here. So just develop PowerShell modules, commands, and scripts in Visual Studio Code. So this extension provides a rich PowerShell language support for Visual Studio Code. Now you can write and debug PowerShell scripts using excellent IDE-like interface that Visual Studio provides. And also in the extension, there is like a theme to make it look like the PowerShell ISE. I won't be using that. You can definitely pick that option if you want it as well. But we are just going to be using the default dark theme for Visual Studio Code here. So let's just go ahead and let's click on install. And this is going to install. This should only take probably a minute or two. It should not take very, very long. So once this is done, it's already done here. So as you can see, we've already got our little PowerShell option at the bottom here. And if we actually go ahead and we type in ps version table.ps version, we will see that it is currently using the 7.2.6 version of PowerShell. So that is perfect. That's what we want. So let's go ahead and let's just close out of this here. And we're going to go to the Explorer. And all we're going to do is we're going to click on Open Folder here. And this is where we are going to set up our scripts folder. So I'm going to select this PC. I'm going to go in the C drive. And just in the C drive here, I'm going to create a scripts folder. And we are going to hit select folder. And that will open up the folder in Visual Studio Code. And all we're going to do is we're going to trust the authors of all files in the parent folder C. And we are going to say yes to that. So here we have our interface. So all we need to do is create a new file here. And for PowerShell, the extension is PS1. So let's just create a script here called test.ps1. And here is our environment. So we can actually type in PowerShell code directly in here. So let's just type one example here. So before I actually type out the example, one of the main things was PowerShell hasn't changed from 5.1, hasn't changed from PowerShell 2, PowerShell 3. They are all verb noun commandlets. So your commands are called commandlets and they're always verb noun. That means there's going to be a verb dash noun. So similar to get date, get service. You can do a set service. So as you can see, there's always a verb like an action and then a noun followed suit. Now you might have people that build modules that don't necessarily follow that standard. But for the majority, for the most part, all the modules that you are going to be using and downloading and creating should use the verb dash noun nomenclature, I guess you would call it. So that would be the basics for the verb noun and how commandlets are really configured to work. So let's do ahead and let's do a get dash service here. And you can just run the code. So you have two options. So the second option here, which is also for F8, this would run if we highlighted our get service. There's all of our services on our computer. If we did a get date here and we did not want to get service first, we would just highlight get date and we would be able to execute just the lines that we wanted to execute. If you click on this play button or this run button at the top here, this will actually run all the lines of code. So here we can see that we actually get our get service and our get date. Now you might notice that the get date looks a little bit different compared to if we just had it like this. And that is because the way that the get service actually outputs to the console will actually affect the way that the get date gets outputted to the console as well. We'll be getting into those nuances a little bit later on. But as long as you know what a commandlet is, it is a verb noun. That is very, very good to start off with. Now, this is in Visual Studio Code. If we actually go ahead and just launch the PowerShell console, we will see if we do a get service, we get the exact same thing. If we do a get dash date, we get the date. And that is how commandlets work and how to execute commandlets. Now, you might start to wonder, how am I going to remember all these different commandlets? Now, there are thousands and thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of commandlets. There are really no way to remember them all, but all you really need to do is actually know 2 commandlets, and that will actually help you with all the commandlets afterwards. So the first commandlet that is very, very handy is get dash command. So that is just get dash command. And then if we actually just run this here, so if we just run this line here, so this will get us all the commands that we currently have loaded in our PowerShell session. So here we can see in our output, we have wait debugger, we have some update, we have some unblocks, we have test connection, which is very similar to a ping. We have test path to see if a path to a file or a path to a folder exists. We have some start jobs, some start process, start services. So there are a bunch of different commandlets here. Now, let's say you knew that there was a commandlet that kind of worked for services, but you weren't really too sure, but you knew it was something service. What you would do is do a star. Actually, we would do a dash noun here or dash name, but we're going to do a dash noun, and we're going to do service. And if we run this here, so here are all the commandlets with the noun service. So if we know that has to do something with services, but we don't really remember the verb, here are all the commandlets that have the service nouns. We have get service, new service, remove service, restart, resume, set, start, stop, suspend. Now, if you wanted to get more information on that one commandlet, let's say, the other commandlet that is very handy to know is the get-help commandlet. So if we do get-help, then we would actually pass in the commandlet that we want help with. So we could do, let's see, get service. So if we do a get help with get service, let me just expand this out here. So here is the get help. So we have name, get help, we have aliases, and we have remarks. So it doesn't really give us a whole lot. Get service is pretty basic, but if we do a get dash help with get service, and then we do a dash full beside it, we run this here. So here we actually get a lot more information. So here we have the get service, we have the syntax. So here it will actually tell us what it requires or the different types of parameters it could take, whether or not they are required. So here we can see that the display name is something that is required. We need to pass in a name of a service to be able to get that service, or it will just pull back all the services. And then the inputs here, we have the output. So we'll output a system.serviceProcess.service controller. And again, we have the aliases. Now, what the alias are basically a shorthand notation for the commandlets. So if we do a GSV for get service, which was what the alias was, we will see that it does exactly what get service did. Now, one thing about aliases is that they are great. They are super handy if you're maybe using the console. It saves you some keystrokes. But if you are writing scripts, I would tend to avoid using these aliases Because if you go back in the future, you might not know what that alias means. And also, if someone else goes and reads your code, maybe they aren't as familiar with PowerShell, and the aliases might throw them off, and it might make it a little bit more hard for them to actually read your code. And one of the great importances of coding is definitely the readability of your scripts will definitely far surpass, saving a couple keystrokes. So I would definitely always recommend to do the get service over GSV. And you're going to see like a lot of other aliases are even less obvious sometimes. And you can also create your own aliases. So that would be even more confusing as well. Now there is a commandlet that you can use to get aliases. Now, as you probably kind of assumed by now, it would be something like get-alias. And if we actually just run that commandlet, we actually get all the aliases, and we actually get the commandlet that they're used for. So PS is get process, popd is pop location, OH is out host, OGV is out grid view, and I is new item. So some of them are fairly obvious to see, like there is echo for write output. If you're coming from a Linux background and you know how to use echo, echo would be a write output, so to write to the console or write to what the user can see. So these are all very, very easy to go get. But once again, I would definitely say for readability purposes, I would try to avoid these aliases, especially if they're things like where object or for each with the % and question mark. It could get very, very confusing for someone that doesn't really know PowerShell a whole lot, or that is just new to programming or new to scripting. I would try to avoid those. So that is pretty much it for the getting help with commands, and getting the aliases and getting a different list of commands. Now there are some parameters that we will actually see in just a moment here that will actually help us. There are some very, very default parameters in PowerShell. The more common one is going to be the what if parameter and the confirm parameter. So to actually show you guys that here, let's actually save our script here. And all we're going to do in our script is just a get service. We are actually going to save that. And what we are going to do is we are going to go to PowerShell 7. We're going to open up the console. And what we're going to do here is we are just going to go ahead and navigate to our scripts here. So we're just going to do a cd ... And that is actually going to exit out here. And let's go ahead and let's cd into our scripts folder. Another way to do this would be set location. Set location and then the path. And here, if we just did a C:\\, we would go right back to a backslash. And then if we did C:\\, scripts, as you can see, we actually go ahead. So there is a PowerShell version to actually set your location for your console or your actual working script directory. So let's actually go ahead and in scripts here, let's do a ./test.ps1, and there is our script. It executes, so that is awesome. It is currently working great for us. Now, one thing that you might want to also check in your PowerShell settings in your console is actually do a get-execution policy. Now, by default, it is remote signed on Windows 11. There was a time in Windows 10, and I believe Windows 7 as well. I could be wrong on the Windows 7 portion, but Windows 10 for sure. There was a time where it was actually set to restricted. If you actually go watch our old video of the PowerShell fundamentals, this was actually set to restricted, and we actually had to set it to remote signed, which was the recommended setting by Microsoft at the time, was to set it to remote signed. Remote signed will let you run code that was written by you or written by a trusted scripter. What I mean by trusted scripter is in their scripts, they will actually have basically a certificate, basically signing the script saying that it is safe. So this will prevent any code to be downloaded from the internet and then you just run it blindly. This will actually prevent that, of course, unless you just allow it or copy paste it into your own script. That is completely up to you. Now, there are multiple other execution policies. So if we do a set-execution policy and we do execution policy, we can see all signed, bypass, default, remote signed, restricted, undefined, unrestricted, and all signed once again. So restricted will not let you execute any scripts whatsoever. Unrestricted will let you execute anything you want on your computer, which is very, very dangerous. Would not recommend. But as I was saying, there is parameters. There is a what if parameter. So if we did set execution policy restricted and we did a what if and we run that here, we actually see what if performing the operation set execution policy on target restricted. So it gives you the best kind of explanation of what would happen. So if we actually run this here, if we set the execution policy as restricted, we will see that it actually is denied because you do need to run PowerShell as administrator to change the execution policies. So let's actually go ahead and let's launch PowerShell 7 as administrator here. And let's do a set execution policy. And the execution policy that we're going to want to set it to is restricted. And let's hit enter here. And then let's do a get execution policy. And now we are restricted. Now, if we just set it back here to execution, that I actually put get execution policy. So set execution policy. Execution policy is going to be now remote signed. So there it is. And if we try to, I believe if we try to set it to unrestricted, it will let you, it won't give you like any types of warning or anything like that. So it is better to do a remote signed. So once we have it set to remote signed, there are also other things that you can do with the execution policy. You can set it to specific user scopes as well. But we're just wanting to really make sure that our execution policy is remote signed. This way it lets us execute our scripts, but we are still safe. The other parameter that we will actually be seeing quite a bit here is confirm. Now I won't have any examples to show you right away this instant, but we will have examples later on of confirm. But basically confirm is usually if you are executing some type of commandlet, it will actually prompt you before you do it because it's usually something that's dangerous. Like if you're deleting a user in Active Directory, it will prompt you to see, are you sure you want to delete this user? And you have to click yes. You can actually pass in the parameter of confirm and set that to false, and it will actually not confirm with you to make sure that you want to do that. So use the confirm wisely. It's definitely dangerous if you don't know what you're doing because it will not double check with you to make sure that that is actually what you want to do. But then again, if you are wanting to run your scripts headless and have zero intervention from a user, that -confirm parameter is very, very handy. So hopefully this video definitely explained PowerShell 7 and the Visual Studio Code IDE and the basic fundamentals of PowerShell for you guys. In the next video, we're going to be looking at variables and the different things that we can do with variables in PowerShell. So we're going to be following the same template as the old PowerShell for beginners kind of guide. So we're going to be looking at variables. We're going to be looking at arrays. We're going to be looking at hash tables. We're going to be looking at the conditional statements. We are going all from scratch, but we are going to be always using PowerShell 7.2 and Visual Studio Code for everything. And hopefully that'll just be a little bit better for the new people that are joining in, because a lot of the new videos that I'm making, that I've been making for the last little while, have all been PowerShell 7.2, and the PowerShell for beginners was still using the ISE. So hopefully this will clarify things. The quality should be a lot better now. So be sure, if you liked this video, to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and also hit that notification bell to be notified when that next video comes out. I will see you guys on the next video.